I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about the ancient texts that we're beginning the semester with of Gilgamesh and the Old Testament. I know many of you have finished reading and annotating Gilgamesh, so that's great, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about it. So you can see from this map where exactly the story was taking place. It's about this green area called Mesopotamia. This is the birthplace of civilization. It was a very fertile region, and there was a lot of agriculture, and it really is where everything in the world began. Modern day, it's Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Lebanon, all these things, places you've heard of in the news, I'm sure, in your lives. It's always been a volatile area, but we certainly know that it still is. But that's the area that was once Uruk, where Gilgamesh ruled, and where the story takes place. Now and by the way, that story was written about 4,000 years ago, which predates the Bible and all other texts. It's the most ancient text that we know, the first thing. So it's really an important piece. And we didn't actually know that this existed until the 1800s. In 1844, an archaeological dig was being conducted in the area, and these tablets were discovered, which was pretty cool. And they weren't translated until 1872. As the years have gone on, more and more pieces of the tablets have been found. They're in pieces because they were made out of clay. So even up until 2 or 3 years ago, they keep finding more pieces of the tablets. So we get a more complete story as time goes on, which is really kind of cool. So what the writers have done in the past, the translators and the archaeologists and translators who have put this together, they've sometimes guessed where things have been missing, and they fill it in as best they can. Sometimes they just sort of leave ellipsis dots so that you, the reader, knows that it was broken and they didn't really know. But there's lots of different ways that writers can do this. So it's a really interesting text. So most ancient texts are about leaders, rulers, kings, not ordinary people. The things were written, or first they were spoken, of course, but eventually written down because they were important to the culture's history, norms and mores, and just, the whole culture, to preserve it and sort of create a legacy so that things were not forgotten. So the leaders in these days were thought to be godlike, part god. Gilgamesh is described as 2/3 God, 1/3 man, which is like something we'll see in the New Testament later on. And so therefore, Gilgamesh is superior and the best to lead. He has a God-given, if you will, right to be the leader. And we'll see that kind of thinking for centuries. Even when we get into later times with kings and queens, they rule by divine right. Certainly if you are a god or goddess, it's obviously gods, I shouldn't say obviously, but it's gods. It's men who do the leadership roles. They are superior, or seen as superior by the ordinary people. So these stories began as oral traditions where people would go around and tell these stories. Different people would tell them to different audiences. Of course, as you do that, stories change, things get enhanced and really exaggerated. Some things get left out. Some things just get totally changed to serve the purposes of the teller and the audience. So certainly they change a lot over time. It does finally get written down, and then it's less likely to change because it is literally, in this case, written in stone. And at least for those who know how to read, it's there in one translation. But it's still, of course, told orally. So the translations really matter. And there's always a couple of versions of Gilgamesh out there, the way they're translated. And I posted both of them for you. The prose narrative that just reads like a story, as well as the poem version of it. So it can be translated in a couple of different ways. So the story of Gilgamesh himself, Gilgamesh lived in 2500 to 1500 before the Common Era BCE. And it took another 1500 to 2000 years to get it written down in cuneiform. Oh, and by the way, this is what cuneiform looks like. I think there was a photo in the handout as well. Handout in the posting as well. But that's one of the tablets that has been kind of reconstructed from the pieces that they have dug up from these archaeological finds. And like I said, they're still finding it. I'll put some articles on our Blackboard page about that. So the story, as it developed over about 1,000 years between the oral tradition and having it written down, had a lot of changes, and it was really kind of neat when they found it. So we can see a lot of interesting things in the text of Gilgamesh. We see a lot of similarities to the Old Testament, like the flood story. It seems there's some real historical evidence that there was an actual flood that really devastated the world and made a lot of changes, so it's kind of interesting. We also know that Enkidu was created from the soil, and we get that version in the Old Testament as well, creating people from the earth, from dirt. So that's kind of interesting. There's a lot to be said in the story about dreams. Dreams are considered very, very important. The gods are directly involved in the lives of the people. We can see Enlil and Shamash coming down and interfering in the lives of Gilgamesh and Enkidu. We also see that in the Old Testament. God comes and deals directly with people. So that's kind of an interesting similarity as well. There's a lot of repetition. I'm sure you noticed that in Gilgamesh because, again, it was an oral tradition and things were unspoken. So when you're listening, it's important to repeat important things. So we do see that a lot in Gilgamesh. There's also a sneaky serpent in Gilgamesh, much like in the Old Testament. What else? Oh, the whole purpose of the story, like I said earlier, it's definitely to record a history and to preserve cultural ideals. But it's also to show the importance of leaving a legacy, making a mark, standing out for some reason in history. It's important to do big things and leave some kind of a legacy. So we see Gilgamesh doing that when he goes to kill Humbaba, who really has done nothing wrong and begs for his life, but Gilgamesh will not allow that to happen. The other thing that resonates for pretty much all audiences with the story are things like the deep friendship, the love, the bond between Gilgamesh and Enkidu. He really didn't have those feelings for anyone until Enkidu is sent to him. Another thing that resonates with audiences is the idea that, we're mortal. We are all going to die at some point, and that we struggle against that. But there's really nothing we can do. We can't achieve immortality. Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh dies, everyone dies as Gilgamesh learns. And the best you can hope for is to be remembered. So it's kind of an interesting story in that it still resonates with audiences today, with readers, because we can relate to him a little bit. Preserving one's legacy is so important. We're going to see that over and over. And part of the legacy, of course, is what happens to the people that are being led. So we're going to see how that works out for him and his culture as we go through the story. At the end of the story, he is humbled. He's a little bit wiser because he realizes he's not such hot stuff. So in my next little video, I'm going to go over the text of Gilgamesh in more detail so we can go through it and see if our understanding can be enhanced. But I did just want to give you some historical and geographical background about it so you could appreciate just how old it really is and the part of the world that it comes from and why that part of the world, has such treasures for us even today. So it is, I think, a pretty fascinating story.